The day Seongram Royal College expelled me, they made sure the whole campus could watch. I stood under the glass dome of the central hall while rich students lined the balconies like they had bought tickets to my execution. A security guard held my worn backpack in one hand, and in the other, he held the antique founder seal they claimed I had stolen. My name was Lee Hyunwoo, and until that morning, my biggest crime had been being poor enough for them to believe anything. I was a scholarship student from Guro District, the kind of student Seongram used in brochures but avoided at alumni dinners. My mother ran a small late-night food stall near the station, my younger sister Heron studied beside boxes of cabbage and rice cakes, and I worked every job that ended before dawn. I cleaned lecture halls, repaired old projectors, delivered printing bundles, and still ranked second in the business department. None of that mattered once a rich boy pointed at me and used the word thief. The rich boy was Kong Tae-oh, heir to the Kong Min Group and unofficial prince of Seongram. He smiled like every hallway belonged to him because, in practice, most of them did. His father funded the new research tower, his mother chaired the Culture Foundation, and his friends treated punishment as a rumor invented for poor people. He stood beside Dean Baek Junseok that morning, looking wounded, as if my existence had personally embarrassed his family. The accusation sounded ridiculous at first. The founder seal had disappeared from the Heritage Gallery during the foundation night rehearsal, and somehow it had been found inside my locker wrapped in my cafeteria apron. Tae-oh claimed he saw me near the gallery after hours. 2 of his friends confirmed it. The cleaning supervisor said my access card entered the building at midnight. Nobody mentioned that I had been fixing a broken projector across campus at the request of Professor Han. I tried to explain, but Dean Baek raised his hand before my second sentence. He said Seongram valued honor more than excuses. The word honor echoed under the dome while students whispered and lifted their phones. Honor, from people who treated cafeteria workers like furniture. Honor, from a dean who smiled at donors harder than students. Honor, from Kong Tae-oh, who once made a first-year kneel for stepping on his imported shoes. Then Choi Yerin entered the hall. She was student council president, daughter of the old Choi banking family, and the only rich student who never wasted words for attention. People moved aside when she walked, not because she was loud, but because silence obeyed her. She looked at the seal, then at me, and her expression did not become pity. It became calculation. That was better than pity, but not enough to save me. Dean Baek asked me to confess and return the seal voluntarily, as if confession had not already been decided for me. He said a poor background could make students vulnerable to temptation, and Seongram would show mercy if I protected the college's reputation. The hall buzzed with satisfaction. They wanted me to accept the smaller shame so their bigger lie could stand clean. I looked at Tae-oh, and he winked. My chest burned so badly I thought I might collapse. I wanted to shout his name until the balconies shook. I wanted to drag every hidden cruelty into the open. But my mother's face appeared in my mind, her hands red from boiling broth, telling me survival sometimes meant swallowing fire until you found water. I swallowed once. The fire did not go down. Dean Baek placed the expulsion document on a tablet and ordered me to sign. The screen showed my name, scholarship termination, dorm eviction, immediate academic ban, and a note that I had forfeited appeal by refusing to cooperate. I stared at the digital line where my signature belonged. If I signed, they would own the story. If I refused, security would drag me out and call that proof. Before my finger touched the screen, my cracked phone vibrated inside my pocket. I almost ignored it, but the sound was different, low and metallic, like an old lock turning. The display had gone black except for a silver emblem shaped like the missing founder seal. One line appeared in Korean and English at the same time. Unjust expulsion ceremony detected. Candidate status awakened. I thought fear had made me hallucinate. Then more words appeared. Founder ownership system initiating final eligibility test. Task 1. Leave without confessing to a lie. Task 2. Protect another victim before protecting yourself. Task 3. Accept loss without surrendering truth. Reward. Full institutional acquisition. Failure. Permanent disqualification and evidence erasure. The hall roared around me, but all I could hear was my pulse. At that exact moment, Mrs. O, the elderly cleaning worker who had unlocked the maintenance room for me the night before, was pushed forward by a security officer. Dean Beck announced that staff negligence had helped me access restricted space. Mrs. O's face went white. She had a grandson in hospital and took overtime just to survive. The dean was preparing to throw her under the bus, so the accusation looked complete. Something in me settled. I could lose my scholarship, my dorm, my future, but I would not let them bury a woman who had done nothing except hand me a ladder. I turned away from the tablet and bowed to Mrs. O instead of the dean. I said clearly that she had no part in this accusation, and if Seongram punished her, every maintenance request, time log, and security record from that night should be audited publicly. The hall quieted because poor students were supposed to defend themselves, not evidence. Dean Beck's jaw tightened. Teo stopped smiling for half a second. Mrs. O covered her mouth with shaking fingers. The system text changed on my phone. Task 2 completed. Human priority verified. Continue without begging. Dean Beck demanded I sign immediately. I took the tablet, but instead of writing a confession, I wrote one sentence in the signature field. I reject this false accusation and request full evidence preservation. The dean's face hardened. He said refusal would make my expulsion permanent. I said then the record should show I refused to lie. Security moved toward me before the hall could decide whether to laugh or panic. I walked out on my own. That was the hardest part. Not fighting, not pleading, not grabbing Teo by his expensive collar. I walked through the students who had already decided my life was finished. Some whispered thief. Some looked away. A girl from my accounting class cried quietly, but said nothing. Yeren watched from the stairs with unreadable eyes, and Teo gave me a lazy little wave as if sending off a servant. Outside the main gate, cold air hit my face harder than any slap. My dorm card stopped working before I reached the sidewalk. My scholarship portal locked. The part-time job account connected to campus suspended my shift access. Seongram did not just expel students. It erased them from every door at once. I sat beside the stone wall with my backpack and finally let my hands shake. Then my phone vibrated again. The silver emblem expanded until the cracked screen looked like a legal seal. Final eligibility confirmed. Existing ownership council has failed founder mandate. Dormant acquisition clause activated. College protection trust liquidating strategic reserve. Hostile purchase complete. Congratulations, Lee Hyunwoo. You are now the controlling owner of Seongram Royal College. For several seconds, I only stared. Then I laughed once, a broken sound that scared even me. Owner. The word was too large for my empty pocket. My bank account still looked normal, my shoes were still muddy, and my mother still had no idea I had been expelled. Yet the system showed documents opening one after another. Voting shares, land deeds, foundation contracts, creditor transfers, board authority, emergency administrative rights. I thought it was a scam until 3 black cars stopped in front of me. A woman in a gray suit stepped out and bowed so deeply people on the sidewalk turned to stare. She introduced herself as Director Jang Mira of Hanul Trust Legal Office. She said the founder ownership system had completed acquisition through dormant founder rights, and her office had been waiting 21 years for a qualified student owner to appear. I asked if she had the wrong person. Director Jang looked at my backpack, my shaking hands, and the expulsion notice on my tablet. Then she said the system rarely chose comfortable people. Before I could answer, a notification from Seongram appeared across every student phone on campus. Emergency ownership transfer registered. All disciplinary actions paused pending new owner review. I heard screams from inside the gate. The first call came from Dean Beck. His voice, which had sounded like stone under the dome, now sounded like paper in rain. He asked where I was and said there had been an administrative misunderstanding. I looked through the gate and saw students running toward windows. Teo stood on the front steps with his phone in hand, no longer waving. I ended the call without answering. Director Jang told me I could return immediately and assume emergency authority. I almost said yes because the image of Teo kneeling in panic burned sweetly in my mind. But then I remembered the system's wording. Ownership was a reward, but also a test. If I returned only to crush them, maybe I would become another version of the people who crush me first. So I made my first owner decision from the sidewalk. Preserve all evidence. Freeze expulsion enforcement. Protect Mrs. O and every staff member connected to the case. Suspend access to the Heritage Gallery records until outside auditors arrived. Notify the board that I would meet them at noon. Director Jang's eyes sharpened, almost approving. My phone displayed a quiet line. Owner impulse restrained. Stewardship score opened. I went home before returning to campus because my mother deserved to hear the truth from me, not from a news alert. The food stall was still closed for morning prep, and Heron was packing school books beside boxes of rice cakes. When I entered with my backpack during class hours, Mother knew something had happened. Mothers read disasters before sons speak. I told them everything badly. Expulsion, false theft, system, ownership, college purchase. Heron laughed first because she thought I was describing one of her webtoons. Then Director Zhang's staff confirmed the documents over a secure call, and my mother sat down slowly, as if her knees had forgotten their job. She asked only one question. If I owned the college now, would I become the kind of person who had hurt me? That question did more than any system warning. I wanted to promise instantly, but promises are easy before power starts feeding you excuses. I told her I did not know who I would become, but I knew who I was afraid of becoming. Mother nodded as if that answer was more honest than confidence. Heron asked if this meant she could eat in the college cafeteria for free. Mother smacked her arm, and for 1 second, the world felt normal. By noon, news of the ownership transfer had broken across campus forums. Students who called me thief 4 hours earlier were now arguing whether they had always believed I was innocent. Screenshots disappeared. Comments were deleted. Teoa's friends changed profile photos like guilt could be edited out. The phrase "poor student buys college" trended before anyone understood how the purchase worked. I returned through the main gate, not the service entrance. The same guard who once checked my scholarship ID like it was fake now bowed so fast his cap nearly fell. I did not enjoy it as much as I expected. Fear was not respect. It only wore a cleaner uniform. Behind him, students lined the path, pretending curiosity was not terror. Seongram looked the same, but its silence had changed owners. Dean Beck waited in the boardroom with every administrator who had ignored me for 2 years. Teo was not there yet, but his father's lawyer was. The board chairman, Han Young-seok, smiled with the stiffness of a man watching his chair catch fire. He welcomed me as acting owner Lee. Hearing that title from his mouth almost made me laugh. I sat at the head of the table only because Director Zhang placed the authority folder there. My first instinct was to make them stand the way I had stood under the dome. Instead, I opened the expulsion file and asked for evidence. Not rumors. Not donor statements. Not character assessments. Evidence. The room became very interested in looking at documents they suddenly could not find. Dean Beck said the matter had moved quickly due to concern for institutional integrity. I asked whether integrity usually required deleting CCTV from 3 angles. His face twitched. The outside auditor had already recovered deletion logs. Professor Han's maintenance request showed I was in the East Lecture Building at midnight, not the gallery. Mrs. O's time logs proved she was elsewhere. Every clean accusation began staining the table. Teo finally entered without knocking, still dressed like arrogance could survive paperwork. He said this whole situation was absurd and that ownership could not belong to a thief just because some strange trust bought shares. I looked at him for a long moment. The system offered an option: immediate expulsion of primary accuser. Satisfaction probability, high. Long-term truth probability, medium. I closed the prompt. I told Teo he would remain enrolled until the investigation ended. His confidence flickered because he expected revenge. Revenge would have made him a victim in his own mind. Investigation made him a suspect with a schedule. I ordered his campus privileges suspended, his phone records preserved, and his access to student council facilities frozen. His father's lawyer objected. Director Zhang handed him the bylaws, already highlighted. The board tried to adjourn. I refused. If a poor student could be expelled in public within 15 minutes, then rich administrators could answer questions for 1 afternoon. I announced an emergency review of every disciplinary case from the last 5 years involving scholarship students, campus workers, or donor families. The room turned colder than winter. That was when I understood my false accusation was not an accident. It was a habit. When the meeting ended, students filled the corridor. Some bowed. Some tried to apologize before I remembered their names. A boy who had whispered thief near the fountain told me he had been pressured by Teoa's group. A girl from my accounting class cried again and said she should have spoken. Their apologies came so fast they became noise. The system displayed a new category: forgiveness requests detected. I did not accept or reject them immediately. Forgiveness given too quickly can become a performance for the guilty. Forgiveness withheld forever can become a prison for the injured. I told them the college would create a testimony portal. Anyone who had participated in false accusations, bullying, staff abuse, or evidence hiding could report before the audit found them. Truth first, mercy later. The hallway emptied quietly. Yerin approached last. She did not apologize. She said she had reviewed the gallery schedule and found a missing reservation under Teo's private club. I asked why she had not spoken earlier. Her face stayed calm, but her fingers tightened around the folder. She said she had been looking for proof since the haul, and unlike rumors, proof could survive rich fathers. I did not trust her. I took the folder anyway. The folder changed everything. Teo's club, the Crown Circle, had booked the Heritage Gallery the night before the seal vanished. The reservation had been hidden under a faculty code. That faculty code belonged to Professor Kwan, Dean Beck's closest friend. There were also delivery invoices for a private art broker who had no reason to enter campus. The seal had not been stolen for a prank. It had been moved for sale. I asked Yerin why she cared. She looked toward the closed boardroom doors and said her older brother had been expelled 3 years ago for leaking donor bribery records. The official reason was academic misconduct. He disappeared from elite society after that, and her family ordered her not to reopen the matter. She had entered student council to collect evidence quietly. My expulsion had not shocked her. It had confirmed her brother was not alone. For the first time, Seongram became bigger than my humiliation. My stolen future was one page in a book of buried students. The system displayed restoration path expanded. Objective: convert ownership into institutional correction. Warning: revenge-only governance triggers transfer instability. I stared at the warning until Yerin asked if my phone had given me another command. I looked up too quickly. Her eyes narrowed. She knew something. Not everything, but enough to understand I was not simply a lucky buyer. I told her the system was none of her business. She said if the system now controlled Seongram through me, then it had become every student's business. I hated how reasonable that sounded. Rich students usually defended closed doors. Yerin seemed dangerous because she wanted one opened. That evening, Mother visited campus with Heron, carrying food because she believed billionaires still forgot lunch. The students stared at our old plastic containers like they were sacred artifacts. Mother ignored them completely and told me I looked hungry. Heron whispered that everyone was bowing too much and it felt creepy. She was right. Poverty had made people look through us. Power made them look too hard. Mother insisted on meeting Mrs. O. The old cleaning worker cried when Mother bowed to her first. I watched two women who had spent their lives cleaning up after richer people comfort each other in a hallway built with donor names. Something in my chest loosened. Owning Seongram did not mean I had risen above them. It meant I now had the authority to stop the floor from swallowing people like them. My second owner decision was small but immediate. No staff member could be disciplined for cooperating with the audit. All pending wage penalties were suspended. Contractor records would be reviewed. Staff dining areas would be repaired before any donor lounge renovation continued. Board Chairman Han objected, saying these changes required budget review. I asked whether framing students required budget review too. He stopped talking. The system rewarded that decision not with money, but with access. A hidden dashboard opened showing Seongram's financial veins. Donations, loans, construction contracts, land pledges, disciplinary settlements, scholarship clawbacks. The college looked prestigious from outside because suffering had been carefully itemized inside. Rich students paid for marble. Poor students paid with silence. The founder system had not bought a college. It had handed me a crime scene with classrooms. Teo struck that night. A campus forum post claimed I had staged my own accusation to trigger a mysterious trust and steal ownership. It included edited clips of me standing near the gallery, my mother's food stall debt, and Mrs. O's grandson's medical bills. The message was obvious. Make my innocence look profitable. Within an hour, accounts called me a system fraud, a poor manipulator, a revenge owner. I wanted to expose Teo's family instantly. The system even offered a tool, social dominance package, reputation reversal through targeted leaks. I could ruin him before morning. I could make every student who doubted me crawl. My finger hovered over the screen until Heron sent me a photo of her homework with the caption, "Do not become a villain before helping me with math." I laughed despite myself and closed the package. Instead, I released one clean statement through Director Jang. All evidence would be handled by independent auditors. All accusations, including those against me, would be preserved publicly after privacy review. Anyone spreading forged personal data would face legal consequence, not revenge posts. It was less satisfying than destruction. It also lasted longer. By dawn, the edited clips had been traced to a marketing agency linked to Kong Min Group. Teo arrived at campus expecting fear. He found auditors in the student council archive, lawyers in the dean's office, and reporters outside the main gate asking about forged posts. His friends began distancing themselves in real time. One of them, Seo Min-jae, avoided his eyes. I noticed. People who lie confidently look at the victim. People who lie under pressure look at the floor. I summoned the Crown Circle members one by one. Not to the boardroom, but to the same central hall where they had watched my expulsion. No balconies, no crowd, no phones. Just a table, recorders, legal observers, and the founder seal resting inside a clear evidence box. Teo laughed when he saw it. I realized he had expected the seal to vanish forever. Min-jae broke first. He was not kind, but he was not built for prison. He admitted Teo had borrowed his key card to access the gallery, then ordered him to place my apron in the locker room. He claimed he did not know they would frame me permanently. I asked if temporary frame-ups were a different moral category. He lowered his head and finally looked like a boy instead of a surname. Teo called him a coward and said rich families did not fall because scholarship trash found one loophole. The system detected direct contempt from primary accuser, suggested disciplinary escalation. I ignored the prompt and asked Min-jae why the seal was stolen. He hesitated. Then Yerin placed the art broker invoice on the table. Min-jae whispered that the seal was needed to unlock an old founder vault beneath the Heritage Gallery. That was new. Even Director Jang looked surprised. The founder seal was not only ceremonial. It was a physical key tied to Seongrim's original trust archive, a place sealed after founder Yoon Seongrim died. Rumors said the archive contained debt notes, land deeds, and confession letters from the families who built the college. Teo's father had wanted whatever was inside before the ownership transfer changed control. Suddenly, the accusation made colder sense. If I became the thief, attention moved away from Teo's failed vault attempt. If I was expelled, nobody would ask why a poor maintenance worker had been near the East Lecture Hall. If Mrs. O was blamed, staff access logs could be erased. They had not targeted me because I mattered. They targeted me because they thought I was easy to erase. I ordered the founder vault opened with legal witnesses. Board Chairman Han tried to delay, claiming heritage sensitivity. Dean Beck requested time to consult donors. Teo shouted that I had no right to touch college history. I looked at the ownership documents and said history had apparently changed address. The vault would open at noon. Half the campus gathered outside the Heritage Gallery despite security barriers. Yerin stood beside me, holding her brother's old student ID like a prayer. Director Jang inserted the recovered founder seal into a circular lock beneath the gallery floor. The old mechanism clicked awake after decades. When the wall opened, it did not reveal gold or jewels. It revealed filing cabinets, ledgers, and a sealed computer system humming on backup power. The founder archive was Seongrim's real heart. Founder Yoon had documented every major family that donated to the college, including hidden conditions attached to scholarships, land grabs disguised as endowments, and early warnings that elite education would become a market for laundering reputation. He had designed the ownership system to activate only when the college expelled an innocent student under donor pressure. I was not chosen randomly. Seongrim had failed its founder's final trap. The archive also contained files on Yerin's brother, Choi Ji-ho. He had discovered similar corruption and tried to report it. Dean Beck buried the evidence. Teo's father threatened the Choi family's banking alliances, and Ji-ho was expelled for forged cheating. He had not disappeared because he was guilty. He had been pushed out until his own family called silence protection. Yerin's hands trembled so badly, she almost dropped the file. I asked whether she wanted to call him. She said he would not answer her. He had cut contact after believing she chose the family over him. For the first time, the calm student council president looked young and terrified. I understood that feeling. There are hurts bigger than proving someone guilty. Sometimes the harder part is facing the person you failed to protect. The archive's release detonated Seongrim. Alumni families demanded confidentiality. Staff demanded back pay. Scholarship students requested case reviews. Reporters camped outside every gate. Tao's father, Kong Mu-jin, arrived by helicopter that afternoon, as if entering from the sky could make him seem above the law. He walked into my office without greeting and offered to buy back the college at triple its market value. I asked if he meant the buildings, the debt, the students, or the silence. His smile did not move. He said boys like me misunderstood scale. A college was not a classroom. It was an ecosystem of donors, politicians, suppliers, and future leaders. If I damaged that ecosystem, everyone under it would suffer first. It was the same old threat polished into business language. Obey us, or we will hurt the people you care about. The system offered a response. Accept purchase, secure family wealth, exit conflict. Another option pulsed beneath it. Reject purchase, trigger open war. I looked at Kong Mu-jin's gold watch, then at the staff wage records on my desk. My life would be safer if I sold. My mother would sleep. Heron could study abroad. But the college would return to the hands that framed me by sunrise. I rejected the offer. Kong Mu-jin's smile finally thinned. He said then I had chosen collapse. I said collapse had already happened. I was only refusing to cover it with marble. After he left, my knees nearly gave out. Yeren saw it, but did not comment. She simply placed a cup of vending machine coffee on my desk, which tasted terrible and somehow helped. The collapse began immediately. Construction partners paused contracts. Donor families froze payments. A bank called in a credit review. Faculty whispered about leaving. Students panicked that degrees would lose value. The system displayed crisis map after crisis map until my screen looked like a bleeding city. Owner title had felt powerful for 12 hours. Now it felt like holding a sinking ship, while everyone blamed me for noticing the holes. Mother told me to come home for dinner. I said I was too busy saving a college. She said colleges could wait 30 minutes. Sons who skipped meals became stupid owners. I went. Over kimchi stew and cheap rice, she asked who I was trying to prove myself to. I said everyone. She said everyone was too many people for one heart. Then Heron added that rich villains probably ate dinner, which was why they had energy. That night, I changed strategy. I could not run Seongrim as one angry student in an owner's chair. I formed 3 emergency councils, students, staff, and faculty who were not tied to donor families. Each council received access to audit data, budget problems, and reform proposals. Board Chairman Han called it reckless transparency. I called it the first time Seongrim had asked its own people what survival should look like. The first council meeting was chaos. Students wanted refunds, safety, and punishment. Staff wanted unpaid wages and protection from contractors. Faculty wanted academic independence and assurance salaries would not vanish. Everyone was right. Everyone was scared. I stopped pretending I had a grand speech and admitted the college might face financial war. Then I asked whether they wanted a clean lie or an ugly plan. They chose the ugly plan. We froze vanity spending. Donor lounges, gala budgets, luxury landscaping, executive travel, ceremonial renovations. We redirected funds to wages, scholarships, accreditation, and legal defense. Rich alumni called it vulgar. Staff called it breathing. Students called it overdue. The system recorded shared governance initiated. Authority dilution accepted. Stability increased. It was strange to gain strength by giving away control. Tao's friends began begging before the first week ended. Not for forgiveness in the emotional sense, but for protection. Their families worried disciplinary records would affect business alliances. One girl, Ji-eun, admitted she had recorded my expulsion and sent it to an anonymous account. She cried so hard I almost felt cruel just sitting there. Then I remembered her laughing while Mrs. O was blamed. I told Ji-eun forgiveness required repair. She would testify about the edited posts, complete service hours with staff teams, and fund a student worker legal clinic through her family's discretionary donation, publicly and without naming rights. She stared like I had invented a new language. Rich people understood payment. They did not understand payment without a plaque. She agreed because fear had made humility practical. Another bully, Park Do-ha, begged differently. He said his father would hurt him if the disciplinary file reached home. I almost dismissed it as manipulation until his sleeve shifted and I saw bruises older than the scandal. Power travels through families before it reaches campuses. I did not excuse him, but I changed the process. Do-ha would still testify and repair harm. but the counseling office and legal clinic would protect him from retaliation. That decision angered some students. A victim asked why bullies deserve protection. I said they deserved consequences, but nobody deserved to be beaten into obedience by the same system that taught them cruelty. The room did not fully accept it. I barely accepted it myself. Justice feels weaker when it refuses to enjoy pain. But if I only protected innocent people, I would build a college where everyone lied about being innocent. Teo refused to beg. Instead, he declared war through a live stream. He called me a fake owner, a scholarship parasite, a revenge dictator, and a threat to every student whose family built Seongram. He stood in his father's hotel ballroom with perfect lighting and accused me of turning education into class warfare. The clip spread fast because rich anger always finds good production value. I recorded a response, then deleted it. Anger wanted me to look impressive. The ugly plan required something duller. We uploaded the archived documents in batches with legal notes, student case numbers, staff wage calculations, and donor influence maps. No dramatic music. No insults. Just receipts. Teo's live stream gained views. Our documents gained witnesses. Professor Han, the one who had requested my projector repair, came forward publicly. He admitted Dean Beck ordered him to stay silent after the accusation, threatening his research funding. He apologized to me in front of the faculty council. I wanted to accept. I also wanted to ask why his career had been worth more than my life. I said his apology would matter when he helped restore every student file buried by fear. He did. For days, Professor Han worked with auditors, reopening cases and tracing forged academic misconduct charges. The pattern was horrifying. Students who challenged donor families had plagiarism claims appear. Workers who reported abuse lost shift access. Faculty who questioned contracts lost grants. Seongram had not needed prison bars. It had used forms, committees, and polite emails to make people disappear. Yerin finally found her brother through one of those reopened records. Jiho was living in Busan under a different name, working as a night tutor and refusing all family contact. She called him from my office. He answered because the number came through an audit line, not her family phone. When she said his name, he stayed silent so long I thought the call had died. Yerin apologized without defending herself. No speech, no excuses about being young or pressured. She said she should have believed him sooner. Jiho did not forgive her over the phone. He only asked if the files were real. She said yes. He said then he would come to Seoul, not for her, but for every student who had been buried after him. When the call ended, Yerin cried without making sound. The system unlocked another archive section after Jiho agreed to testify. Founder mandate update. Restoration expands through returning erased voices. New authority available. Disciplinary reversal court. Warning. Mass reversal without review may create false justice. I hated that warning because I wanted to clear every victim immediately. But the founder was right. A reverse stamp without truth was just another stamp. We created review panels including students, staff, legal observers, and outside educators. It was slow, painfully slow. Every case had to be read, cross-checked, and heard. Some accused students were innocent. Some were partially guilty but punished unfairly. Some had hurt others while being hurt themselves. Simple revenge could have finished in a day. Justice made everyone sit with complexity until their backs ached. Meanwhile, Kong Mu-jin attacked the college's finances harder. Suppliers canceled contracts. A cafeteria vendor stopped deliveries midweek. Students blamed me when lunch lines collapsed. Staff blamed the old administration. Donors blamed instability. The system offered emergency luxury sale options, including selling and used real estate to a friendly buyer. Director Jang warned the friendly buyer was a Kong shell company. The trap had polite paperwork. We solved lunch with humiliation turned inside out. The student cooking club, local vendors, staff families, and my mother's food stall formed an emergency meal network for 1 week. Rich students complained about eating street food in the cafeteria until Heron loudly asked whether their stomachs required stock certificates. The first day was awkward. The third day, students lined up early. Mother became a campus legend against her will. That week changed more than food. Students who had never spoken to staff learned their names. Faculty served trays. Scholarship students stopped hiding their own part-time work. The crisis Kang created to prove Seongrim needed elites instead showed that the college survived because ordinary people already knew how to improvise. The system recorded community resilience event. Financial pressure effect reduced. Teo hated that most. He had expected shortage to create anger against me. Instead, the cafeteria became the first honest place on campus. So he escalated. During a council meeting, an anonymous file leaked claiming Yaren's family had manipulated the ownership transfer through Choi Bank. The leak was clever because it mixed real Choi documents with forged signatures. Suspicion turned toward the one rich ally I had begun to trust. Yaren offered to step down immediately. That almost made me angrier than the forgery. She had spent years being trained to remove herself before others could accuse her. I told her no. We would investigate like every other case. Not because I trusted her blindly, but because due process only matters when suspicion feels convenient. Her eyes softened for half a second before she hit it. The forged signatures led back to Dean Beck's private assistant and a Kong legal contractor. But one real document inside the leak showed the Choi family had once pressured Jiho to stay silent. Yaren did not deny it. She published the real document herself and asked Jiho whether he wanted the family included in the review. He said yes. Her face went pale, but she agreed. That was when I began trusting her. Trust did not make things easier. Jiho arrived on campus with anger sharpened by 3 stolen years. He looked at Yaren like she belonged to the building that ruined him. He looked at me like I might become its next face. During testimony, he described how the old board destroyed him without needing to raise a hand. By the end, half the room was crying, and the other half looked terrified of memory. I asked Jiho what restoration would mean for him. He said no apology could give back his 20s. No compensation could restore his mother's trust, his career path, or the nights he thought maybe he had deserved it. Then he said restoration meant making sure the next student did not have to disappear to survive. That answer became the foundation of our new disciplinary charter. The charter removed donor influence from student discipline, required evidence preservation, guaranteed appeal counsel for scholarship students, protected staff witnesses, and made public summaries mandatory after privacy review. Board Chairman Han called it radical. Jiho laughed for the first time and said only guilty people considered fairness radical. I liked him immediately. Tao's circle crumbled under the charter hearings. Minjae testified fully. Jiun turned over the edited video chain. Doha revealed donor intimidation networks. The more they spoke, the clearer it became that Tao had orchestrated the frame, but Kang Mu-jin had designed the environment where framing a poor student felt safe. Tao was guilty. His father had taught him that guilt was merely something poorer people carried. Finally, Tao requested a private meeting. I expected strategy. Instead, he arrived alone, no lawyer, no smirk. He asked what I wanted from him. I said truth. He said the truth was that he had not intended to make me owner of anything. He had only wanted to remove an inconvenient poor student before the vault theft became visible. The honesty was so ugly it almost felt clean. I asked if he was sorry. He looked at the floor and said he was sorry he lost. I appreciated the clarity. The system offered no forgiveness path. Some people were not ready for mercy because they still saw remorse as another transaction. I told him he would face the full panel. If he wanted a future beyond his father's shadow, he had to earn truth before asking for forgiveness. He laughed bitterly and said I sounded like a chairman now. The insult landed because I feared the same thing. I did not want to become a young old man speaking in rules. But then I remembered Mrs. O's trembling hands, my mother's question, Jiho's vanished years. Rules were not the enemy. Rules written by people without consequences were. Kang Mu-jin made his boldest move during the national accreditation visit. Without accreditation, Seongrim's degrees would lose value, students would transfer, and my ownership would become a joke with debts. Kang's allies sent anonymous reports claiming governance chaos, financial instability, and unqualified student control. The inspectors arrived expecting a collapsing college. We showed them everything. Not a polished tour. Everything. The old corruption files, new council minutes, emergency budgets, staff wage repairs, disciplinary review system, meal crisis response, reopened student cases, and student attendance data after reforms. Some administrators begged me to hide the mess. I refused. If Seongrim survived by pretending cleanliness, then nothing had changed. One inspector asked whether a poor student suddenly becoming owner was not itself instability. I answered that Seongrim had been unstable long before I received a title. It had simply hidden instability under donor names. Then Mrs. O asked permission to speak. The room turned toward her. She said the first stable day she ever had at Seongrim was the day someone powerful asked whether staff records were true. Her statement did what my documents could not. It put a human pulse inside the audit. Faculty spoke next. Students followed. Even some rich students admitted the old system had rewarded cowardice. Yerin testified about the Choi family's failures. Jiho testified about what delayed justice costs. By evening, the inspectors looked less like judges and more like people realizing they had entered a hospital mid-surgery. Teo did not attend. Kong Mujin did. He sat in the back with that expensive stillness men use when they believe everyone else is temporary. During the final session, he rose and warned that donors nationwide were watching. He said colleges that surrendered to emotional mobs would damage Korea's global education reputation. His words were elegant. His threat was clear. Obey wealth or lose the future. I almost answered with anger. Instead, I asked him to define the future. Was it a student framed for theft because he lacked a lawyer? A worker punished for opening a maintenance room? A brother exiled for reporting bribery? A college so dependent on donors that truth became too expensive? If that was his future, then Seongrim had already lost it, and we were building another. The accreditation team issued conditional approval with required monitoring, not the disaster Kong wanted. It was not a clean victory, but it kept students protected and degrees valid. Kong Mujin's face stayed calm, yet his lawyer immediately began whispering. Teo watched the announcement from outside, separated from his father by more than a hallway. For the first time, I saw fear in him that did not point at me. That night, Teo came to the service entrance where staff now entered through the same gate as students. He looked exhausted. He said his father had decided to sacrifice him publicly, claiming all wrongdoing was a student prank gone too far. He handed me a drive containing emails between Kong Mujin, Dean Beck, Professor Kwan, and the art broker. His hands shook when he said he was not asking forgiveness. I took the drive but did not thank him immediately. Evidence given after self-preservation is still evidence, but it is not heroism. Teo understood. He said his father had taught him to win so completely that losing felt like death. Now he was learning he had never won anything himself. That was the closest thing to honesty I had heard from him. The drive proved Kong Mujin planned to steal founder archive materials and replace the seal with a replica, then frame a staff member if needed. My name appeared later, selected because I had access to multiple buildings and no powerful guardian. There it was in writing, low-risk scholarship target. 3 words that almost erased my life. I stared at them until the screen blurred. Mother found me in the office past midnight. She read the phrase and became very quiet. I expected anger, but she placed one hand over mine and said powerful people reduce others to risk because names make cruelty harder. Then she said my job was not to prove I was high risk now. My job was to make every student impossible to reduce that way again. We used Teo's drive to open criminal complaints against Kong Mujin and Dean Beck. The police moved only after public pressure made delay embarrassing. Dean Beck resigned, then tried to flee to Jeju for health recovery. He was stopped at the airport. Professor Kwan confessed to moving the seal. The art broker named Kong. One by one, the polished adults began discovering that paperwork could bite upward. The campus reacted with a strange mixture of celebration and mourning. Students cheered Dean Beck's arrest, then realized how many recommendation letters, scholarships, and disciplinary records he had touched. Relief came with nausea. Yerin said corruption makes even good memories feel contaminated. She was right. We had to teach the college how to remember without either worshiping or destroying itself. I expected the founder system to unlock after the arrests began. Instead, my phone stayed silent for 3 days. No final chamber, no congratulations, no new authority. Only unpaid invoices, frightened students, and the smell of burnt coffee in the temporary crisis office. When I finally opened the system manually, one line waited for me. Restoration incomplete. Hidden control remains active. That sentence made the room colder than any arrest warrant. Director Jang traced the system signal into old endowment maps and found a name we had barely discussed, Myri Education Holdings. On paper, It was a neutral corporate partner that managed academic technology, exam servers, dorm payments, and alumni credential databases. In reality, it controlled the invisible pipes of the college. We had taken the building, but someone else still held the keys to its bloodstream. The chairman of Myri Education was Moon Young-won, a polished philanthropist who looked harmless in every magazine photo. He donated books, hosted youth forums, and spoke about equal opportunity with a smile gentle enough to fool tired people. But the founder archive showed Moon's company had quietly helped donor families manipulate disciplinary data for years. Kong Moo-jin had been the fist. Moon Young-won had been the software. Yerin recognized his name instantly. Choi Bank had financed Myri's first campus platform, and her family still held preferred shares. She looked sick when she realized her family was not only guilty of silence, but connected to the machine itself. I wanted to comfort her. Instead, she opened her laptop and began pulling records. Sometimes guilt is only useful when it becomes work. Moon requested a meeting before we could summon him. He arrived with one assistant. No threats, no lawyers visible, and a box of expensive tea as if this were a friendly misunderstanding. He congratulated me on my courage and said young reformers often mistook old infrastructure for corruption. I asked why his servers deleted student appeals after donor complaints. He smiled sadly, like I had disappointed him by reading. He said platforms only followed the rules administrators created. If Dean Beck used them badly, that was regrettable but not Myri's responsibility. His words sounded reasonable until Director Jang placed 3 internal emails on the table. In them, Myri's staff discussed hiding appeal logs from scholarship students because donor privacy had priority. Moon did not deny the emails. He said every institution had compromises. The system offered a direct action: terminate Myri contract immediately. Emotional satisfaction high. Operational collapse risk severe. Beneath it, another option appeared: shadow audit. Slower. Safer. Evidence durable. I hated the second option because it sounded like more patience, and patience had begun to feel like punishment. But Seongrim's grades, dorm access, tuition credits, and student records all ran through Myri. If I cut the cord blindly, innocent students would lose everything first. I chose the shadow audit. Moon looked almost pleased, as if delay meant victory. That irritated me enough to stay calm. We created a mirror server under emergency authority and copied every live record with court observers present. Myri objected on technical grounds. Professor Han, trying very hard to redeem himself, pointed out that their contract required data portability in crisis events. Watching Moon's smile tighten was the first pleasant thing that day. The audit revealed a second Seongrim beneath the real one. Students marked as difficult. Staff tagged as low influence. Faculty assigned compliance ratings. Scholarship applicants scored by family pressure risk. My own file had labels from 2 years of quiet monitoring. High ability, low protection, possible agitation if cornered. They had studied me like a pest problem before Teo ever framed me. Reading those labels did something worse than anger. It made me feel washed backward through my own memories. Every delayed form, every lost appeal, every professor suddenly cold after I asked a question, all of it had fingerprints. I had thought rich students looked down on me because they were cruel. The system around them had told them cruelty was safe. We found files on hundreds of students. Some had been denied dorms because their families complained too loudly about fees. Some had scholarship renewals delayed after refusing unpaid donor internships. One girl named Kim Nari had failed a required ethics course after reporting a professor's harassment. She left Seongrim the same year and now worked at a convenience store while paying student debt for credits the college refused to recognize. Nari's case became the next spark. When we contacted her, she laughed bitterly and said Seongrim only called poor students after ruining them. I could not blame her. She refused to testify unless the college admitted wrongdoing publicly before asking for her pain. That demand was fair and politically dangerous. Board Chairman Han said we needed her story first. I said no. We had enough evidence to apologize before making her useful. So we issued a public admission that Seongrim's records had been manipulated by administrative systems and donor pressure. We named categories, not victims. We accepted liability before showcasing suffering. The announcement cost us immediately. Lawsuits multiplied. Alumni screamed. Moon Young-won appeared on television saying I was destabilizing student records through emotional governance. He was calm, careful, and perfectly positioned as the adult in the room. Nari came to campus the next day. She wore a convenience store jacket over her old Seongram hoodie and looked at the front gate like it had teeth. I met her outside, not in my office. She said if I had called her to perform tragedy, she would leave. I said she owed Seongram nothing. She studied me for a long second and said that was the first useful sentence anyone from this place had ever said to her. Her testimony was sharper than any document. She explained how the system punished students without leaving fingerprints. A professor lowers participation grades. A dorm form disappears. A scholarship office requests one more certificate until the deadline passes. Nobody says expelled. Nobody says silenced. You simply become too tired to continue. The room listened, and I realized cruelty had evolved beyond Teo's laughter long ago. Moon responded by threatening a nationwide records injunction. If Seongram accused Myri publicly, he would freeze database authentication pending legal clarification. That meant transcripts, graduation status, transfer credits, even faculty research submissions could stall. Students panicked. Parents flooded the hotline. For the first time since I became owner, the campus anger turned heavily toward me. They wanted justice, but they also wanted their grades to exist. The system offered a dangerous shortcut: seize physical servers through emergency owner authority. It looked legal enough, maybe even satisfying. Director Jang warned Moon had likely prepared a trap where forced seizure would violate national data rules. I hated how villains could hide behind laws they had spent years shaping. Yerin said the answer was not to hate law. It was to make law look at the people it had ignored. We filed for supervised data guardianship with student plaintiffs, staff unions, and faculty representatives as co-applicants. Not Lee Hyunwoo versus Myri. Seongram community versus hidden academic control. It was slower, heavier, and harder for Moon to frame as personal revenge. Nari agreed to be one plaintiff only after the trust promised counseling and legal support for every past victim contacted. She was not going to be used alone. During the hearing, Moon's lawyers argued that students could not understand the complexity of academic infrastructure. Nari stood and asked whether complexity was the reason her harassment report vanished, or only the excuse invented afterward. The judge allowed the question into record. Moon's assistant looked down. I saw the first crack in the calm empire of procedure. The court granted temporary data guardianship. We did not win the whole war, but we took the server mirror out of Moon's hands. Within hours, hidden appeals began reappearing. Graduation holds vanished. Dorm denials reversed. Students received notifications about records they never knew had existed. It was like opening windows in a room everyone had been told was naturally dark. Moon's reputation did not collapse immediately. Men like him survived by being useful to people more powerful than truth. But his company lost exclusive control of Seongram data, and other colleges began asking questions. The system finally updated. Hidden control one exposed. Restoration progress increased. I wanted to feel victorious. Instead, I stared at Kim Nari's restored transcript and wondered how many years could fit inside one corrected file. Nari did not cry when she received official reinstatement. She looked annoyed. She said the paper was 3 years late and did not apologize enough. She was right. We added tuition refund, debt correction, mental health support, and readmission choice. She said she would think about it. Then she asked if the convenience store near campus needed a new manager because she refused to return as a grateful mascot. I liked her immediately. She became one of the first members of the Records Integrity Committee, mostly because she trusted nobody and read every line like it might bite. Administrators feared her. Students loved her. Moon Young-won probably cursed her name. She reminded me that victims did not need to become soft to become part of healing. Some wounds protect the door until better locks exist. The next hidden control was money disguised as tradition. Seongram's elite scholarship society, Blue Lantern, claimed to mentor high-performing poor students. In reality, it paired them with donor families who used them as unpaid assistants, public relations props, and future loyal employees. I had been rejected from Blue Lantern my first year because my profile was considered too independent. At the time, I thought it was another failure. Now it looked like accidental protection. Yerin had served as a Blue Lantern host before she understood the damage. She asked to lead the investigation. I hesitated because guilt can make people overcorrect brutally. She knew what I was thinking and said that if she tried to punish herself instead of fixing the system, I had permission to stop her. That was the kind of trust we were building. Not blind faith, but agreed interruption. The Blue Lantern files were full of beautiful words. Leadership immersion, social mobility, patron guidance. Beneath those words were schedules for unpaid event labor, donor family errands, private tutoring for rich heirs, and loyalty clauses hidden inside recommendation benefits. Scholarship students had been trained to smile beside people quietly extracting their time. One file described them as gratitude ambassadors. I had to leave the room after reading that. We called former Blue Lantern students. Some defended the program because it had helped them survive. Others admitted survival came with humiliation they had never named. One graduate said she owed her career to a donor who made her serve drinks at private dinners before recommending her to a company. She did not know whether to be grateful or angry. That confusion was exactly how exploitation kept breathing. Canceling Blue Lantern outright would have harmed students currently dependent on its housing stipends. Keeping it unchanged would preserve abuse. The system offered an elegant solution. Convert donor mentorship into paid professional fellowships with transparent contracts, student opt-out rights, wage minimums, harassment protection, and no family service. Donors hated it immediately, which usually meant we were close to fairness. At the donor meeting, one elderly chairwoman said students from difficult backgrounds benefited from exposure to refined households. Kim Nari asked if refined households came with overtime pay. Mrs. O, who had no patience for polite cruelty, asked whether her grandson should refine himself by washing donor dishes for scholarship points. The chairwoman's mouth opened and closed like a fish removed from water. Several donors withdrew. The college lost money again. Panic returned like a bad habit. This time, the student and staff councils already knew the rhythm. They proposed smaller program budgets, local professional partnerships, and alumni victim funds. We did not replace aristocratic charity with one billionaire rescue. We replaced it with many imperfect hands carrying pieces. That made the reform harder to attack. The Blue Lantern transition gave me my first real public failure. We underestimated how many students depended on stipends due that month. Payments delayed by 9 days. 9 days is nothing to donors. 9 days is rent, food, medicine, and shame for students who already counted coins. One student confronted me outside the finance office and said my principals did not pay his landlord. He was right. I apologized publicly and personally. Not with a video, not with a polished statement, but in the finance office where the mistake had hurt people. We created an emergency bridge fund and changed transition rules so no reform could pause existing support before replacement money arrived. The system recorded correction after harm. Stewardship score increased, but the message did not comfort me. Some lessons are paid by people who did not volunteer. That failure changed how students saw me. Less hero, more administrator who could be wrong. At first, it stung. Then I realized it was healthier. Heroes do not get corrected until too late. Administrators with public rules get yelled at in time to fix things. Heron said this meant I was now officially boring and useful, which she considered a promotion. Moon Young-won tried one last move through the media, claiming the new trust had created chaos, delayed support, and frightened donors. Technically, parts were true. The cruel thing about reform is that enemies can quote your mistakes accurately while hiding why the old system was worse. I wanted to bury him in counterattack. Yaren suggested we publish a failure report ourselves first. So we did. We listed what had gone wrong in the Blue Lantern transition, who was affected, what we changed, and how students could appeal harm. Reporters seemed confused. Institutions usually buried mistakes until forced. By stepping forward early, we made Moon's attack old news before it aired. Nari said transparency was annoying because it required admitting stupidity, but she grudgingly approved. The final hidden control was reputation. Seongrim's alumni ranking depended on surveys from firms connected to donor families. If they punished us, graduate hiring could suffer. Kong Moo-jin, Moon Young-won, and several angry families quietly pushed companies to avoid Seongrim graduates. Students who had supported reform began fearing they had damaged their futures. That fear was real, and it cut deeper than any insult. I could not tell them ideals would pay salaries. That would be insulting. Instead, We built a career protection alliance with mid-sized companies, public agencies, ethical firms, and alumni who had been ignored by the old elite network. It sounded less glamorous than cable pipelines. It was also more honest. The first week, only 12 companies joined. The old network laughed. Then Jiho contacted graduates who had rebuilt their lives after being pushed out. Nari contacted workers who became small business owners after leaving exploitative campus contracts. Professor Han contacted researchers sick of donor interference. Within a month, the alliance grew beyond Seongram. Companies that valued resilient graduates began showing up. The old network called it charity hiring. The students who received interviews called it a door. Teo surprised everyone by helping. Through his remaining social connections, he identified which companies were quietly blacklisting Seongram students under Kong pressure. He did not ask for credit. Nari still called him a spoiled disaster with useful contacts. He accepted the description. That became his new place for a while. Not redeemed, not trusted fully, but useful under supervision. I watched him one afternoon explaining old donor etiquette to scholarship students preparing for interviews. He looked uncomfortable every time they thanked him. Maybe because gratitude felt too generous. Maybe because he finally understood that knowledge he once used to exclude people could be repurposed. I did not forgive him that day, but I stopped wanting his every effort to fail. The Career Alliance saved accreditation momentum, but it also made me face another truth. I had been measuring victory by how much of the old elite I could defeat. Now we were building alternatives, and alternatives required patience more than adrenaline. Revenge has a clear enemy. Construction has meetings, spreadsheets, and people who arrive late. It was less cinematic. It was also the only thing that lasted. Yeren said the same thing during a late walk across campus. She told me she used to believe courage meant one perfect dramatic choice. Then her brother's case taught her courage could also mean opening the same file every day after everyone else moved on. I asked if she was talking about herself or me. She said both, which was her favorite way of avoiding sentimental honesty. Our relationship became visible before either of us named it. Students began moving aside when we argued in hallways, then whispering like they were watching a political romance drama. Haerin called Yeren my unofficial anti-corruption girlfriend. Mother told Haerin not to tease guests, then asked Yeren whether she had eaten. Yeren answered too politely, which made Haerin laugh harder. I considered resigning from my own life. But Yeren and I did not rush. Too much of our lives had been decided by families, systems, and emergencies. We chose slowly. She said she did not want to become the rich girl reward at the end of my revenge story. I told her I did not want to become the poor boy who proved his worth by being chosen by her. We agreed to remain two difficult people walking in the same direction. That agreement mattered when the Choi family tried to use our closeness. They offered additional funding if Yeren accepted a formal foundation role controlled by them. It was a beautiful trap. Restore family honor, support reform, and quietly regain influence. Yeren showed me the proposal before answering. I told her the choice had to be hers, but the trust rules would treat Choi money like everyone else's. She smiled and rejected the role. Her family called her ungrateful. Jiho took her out for cheap noodles that night and told her she had finally joined the family tradition of disappointing powerful relatives. She laughed with a looseness I had never heard before. Sometimes liberation looks like losing invitations to expensive rooms and realizing you can breathe better outside them. The last major crisis before the final system unlock came from inside the reform movement itself. A group of angry students hacked the old donor wall displays and replaced family names with accusations. Some accusations were true. Some were exaggerated. One was false. The campus applauded for 10 minutes before the mistake was caught. I felt the floor drop beneath me. The student responsible, Baek Sung-go, was a scholarship sophomore whose sister had lost her place at Seongram after a donor complaint. His rage was understandable. His method endangered the truth we were trying to protect. Many students wanted me to let it slide because the targets were mostly guilty. That temptation was brutal. Punishing him felt like siding with donors. Ignoring him felt like saying false accusations were acceptable when our side made them. I met Sung-go in the review room where I had once questioned Teo as friends. He expected expulsion. I saw myself in his clenched fists, the version of me who had wanted to burn everything. I told him his anger had a home here, but not a license to create new lies. He would lose network access temporarily, work with the records committee, apologize to the falsely accused family, and help build a verified public accountability wall. Sungo cried, not because the punishment was harsh, but because it was not the erasure he expected. He said he hated them so much he did not know what to do with it. I said hatred was a signal, not a plan. I had learned that the humiliating way, with a system judging every impulse. He laughed once through tears and said at least my system had better timing than his brain. The verified accountability wall became one of Seongrim's strongest tools. It did not list rumors. It listed confirmed institutional failures, responsible offices, corrective actions, deadlines, and appeal routes. Students could check whether reform promises moved or died. Donors hated seeing failures displayed near their old plaques. Mrs. O said if they wanted prettier walls, they could behave better. When the wall went live, the founder system finally returned with a message I had been waiting for. Hidden controls exposed. Data, money, reputation, rage. Restoration threshold reached. Final ownership chamber available. I read the list twice. Rage being named alongside corrupt systems unsettled me. The founder was not only testing whether I could defeat enemies. He was testing whether I could stop my own side from becoming careless with power. I told the councils about the message instead of hiding it. Director Jang looked alarmed, but I was done letting invisible systems make visible decisions without witnesses. Some students were shocked. Others said they had suspected magic since the ownership transfer anyway. Nari asked whether the system had a complaint department. Mrs. O asked if it paid overtime. For the first time, the founder ownership system had to face the people it claimed to serve. The councils voted to send observers with me to the chamber. Yeren for students, Mrs. O for staff, Professor Han for faculty, Nari for restored victims, Director Jang for legal continuity, and Jiho for external integrity. I agreed. If the system offered me absolute power, I wanted witnesses present before temptation could put on noble language. The trust announcement did not magically make everyone noble. It made everyone political. Rich parents demanded seats because their tuition kept buildings open. Scholarship students demanded majority power because they had suffered most. Faculty demanded independence because education could not be run by emotional popularity. Staff demanded equal votes because buildings did not clean themselves. I listened until my head felt full of broken glass. The system was silent now, which somehow made the noise louder. I had become used to glowing warnings whenever temptation approached. Without them, I had to recognize temptation myself. It appeared as flattering advisors telling me only I could balance the groups. It appeared as angry students asking me to override procedure for a righteous cause. It appeared as fear whispering that shared power would collapse and everyone would blame me. Director Jang drafted the first trust constitution in language so complex even the lawyers looked tired. Mrs. O read 2 pages and said any rule that needed a rich education to understand was already suspicious. She forced us to rewrite every student and staff write in plain Korean. The legal team resisted. Mrs. O resisted harder. That was how the most powerful document in Seongrim's history began sounding like it belonged to actual humans. A faculty bloc led by Professor Ma opposed staff voting rights. He said cleaners and cafeteria workers could not evaluate academic priorities. Mrs. O asked whether professors could evaluate mold in dorm bathrooms from their offices. Students laughed. Professor Ma turned red. I expected the meeting to explode, but Jiho stepped in and proposed separated expertise zones with shared veto over decisions that harmed basic rights. It was boring, precise, and brilliant. Yeren spent nights mapping donor influence routes so they could be blocked without cutting off legitimate support. She looked more alive when solving traps than when attending galas. Once, I found her asleep over a flowchart titled Ways Rich People Pretend Conditions Are Suggestions. I covered her with my jacket. Yeren later saw the jacket and gave me a look so judgmental I considered filing a family complaint. Nari refused to let the trust use the word beneficiary without defining power. She said rich institutions loved calling people beneficiaries because it sounded kinder than saying people with no vote. Her argument changed the entire structure. Students receiving aid would not only receive services. They would elect representatives, review outcomes, and audit delays. That single change turned charity into accountability. The hardest debate was whether I should hold emergency override authority during the first year. Some people wanted it because old enemies were still attacking. Others feared it because every dictatorship begins by calling itself temporary. I wanted to refuse the power completely, mostly to prove I was not hungry for it. Yeren said refusing responsibility for my own image was still image management. Annoyingly, she was right. We compromised. I would hold limited emergency authority for threats to safety, accreditation, or legal preservation, but every use would trigger automatic review within 7 days. Mrs. O called it a leash. I said that sounded rude. She said leashes were useful for dogs and young men with dramatic destinies. The room laughed, and I accepted the clause. Teoa's name caused the ugliest argument. Some students demanded the charter ban anyone involved in frame-ups from future participation. Others said if people who caused harm could never repair harm, they would only hide better. I stayed silent longer than usual because my own pain was not neutral. Finally, I said the trust should separate restoration from absolution. Participation could be earned. Forgiveness could not be demanded. That line became Article 9. Harmdoers may participate in repair only after confession, verified accountability, victim protection, and counsel approval. Participation does not imply forgiveness. It sounded dry on paper, but when I read it, my chest loosened. For months, people had asked whether I forgave them because they wanted emotional debt canceled. Article 9 finally answered for me. Kong Mujin's allies tried to break the trust before it formed by offering private scholarships directly to frightened students. The contracts looked generous, but required withdrawal from testimony and silence about past cases. We called it witness purchase. They called it family support. For one horrible week, I could not blame students who considered signing. Hunger makes ethics feel expensive. Instead of scolding them, we created a survival bridge using emergency funds and public donations with no silence clauses. Mother organized local vendors to sponsor meal vouchers. Alumni victims sent small amounts with notes that hurt to read. One former student wrote that he could not return his lost years, but he could buy another student a month of groceries. The Bridge Fund saved more testimony than any speech I gave. The media tried to turn the bridge into a poverty spectacle. A reporter asked a scholarship student to cry on camera while receiving aid. Nari nearly threw a folder at him. We created media consent rules the next day. No student hardship could be filmed, quoted, or marketed without informed approval and the right to withdraw. Donors complained it reduced emotional impact. I said that was the point. Yeren's father requested a private dinner with me. Everyone warned me not to go. I went because refusing every uncomfortable conversation would make the trust smaller. He served food that probably cost more than Mother's monthly rent and spoke about legacy as if it were a delicate vase. Then he asked whether I truly thought people who suffered were less likely to become corrupt. I said no. I thought people who suffered should still have guards against themselves. He seemed surprised by that answer. Maybe he expected me to worship pain. Many rich people prefer poor heroes who treat suffering like moral decoration. I told him suffering made me angry, suspicious, and sometimes unfair. That was exactly why the trust needed more than my story. He looked at me for a long time and said Yeren had chosen a troublesome ally. I said she seemed to enjoy difficult hobbies. The dinner did not make him a supporter, but he stopped trying to block Yeren's participation. Later, she said that was the closest her father came to apologizing. I asked if that was enough. She said no, but enough and useful were different measurements. That sentence stayed with me because much of reform lived in that uncomfortable distance. As the trust constitution neared completion, the student body held a public debate. I sat in the audience instead of on stage. A business major argued that donor influence was necessary for global competitiveness. A cafeteria worker replied that any competitiveness built on unpaid labor was just cheating with better branding. A professor admitted faculty had hidden behind academic freedom while ignoring student suffering. The debate was messy, loud, and exactly what Seongram had avoided for decades. One poor student stood up and said he feared the reforms would make everyone see him only as wounded. That hit me hard. Reform language can trap people inside victimhood even while helping them. We added a dignity clause stating that aid records, hardship status, and restored cases could not be used to define a student publicly or academically. People were more than the harm done to them. Another rich student asked whether the new Seongram hated wealthy families. The room tensed. I answered that the trust did not hate wealth. It hated unaccountable power. A rich student who followed the same rules as everyone else belonged here. A poor student who abused power would face the same review. That answer pleased almost nobody completely, which made me trust it more. The Constitution passed the councils with arguments still attached. Nobody called it perfect. Perfect documents usually hide the people they exclude. This one carried fingerprints from staff, students, faculty, restored victims, legal experts, and even cautious donors. It was ugly in places, repetitive in others, and stronger because no single person could pretend they had authored justice alone. On the night before signing, I returned to the Founder archive alone. I expected the system to appear and praise the Constitution. It did not. Instead, I heard my own footsteps and the soft hum of climate control around old papers. I realized I had come looking for permission. That embarrassed me. At some point, a person has to stop asking ghosts whether living people have done enough. Yerin found me anyway. She said ghosts were overrated reviewers. I asked if she followed me because she trusted me or because she worried I would dramatically overthink myself into a corner. She said both. Then she placed a printed copy of the Constitution beside the Founder seal and said the dead could read it if they wanted, but tomorrow belonged to the living. I asked if she was scared. She admitted she was terrified. If the trust failed, her family would call it proof that old structures were necessary. If it succeeded, she could never return to the comfortable lie that reform was impossible. I told her I was afraid success would make people expect me to know what I was doing. She smiled and said she had seen my handwriting. No one would make that mistake. For the first time, I held her hand without crisis forcing it. No confession, no dramatic music, no audience. Just two students inside a room full of old evidence, choosing not to let history decide all of us. Her fingers tightened around mine. The campus outside was still unstable, the enemy still active, the future still badly organized. But in that moment, fear did not feel lonely. The next morning, the councils gathered with representatives from every part of Seongram. The Constitution sat on the table thicker than most textbooks. I looked at the people who had fought over every sentence and realized this was the real purchase. Not buying land, not controlling votes, buying time for truth to become structure before power forgot why it had been challenged. Before signing, I asked each council representative to state one thing they would protect even against me. Staff said wage dignity. Students said due process. Faculty said academic truth. Restored victims said memory. Legal observers said transparency. Yerin said the right to challenge heroic stories before they become excuses. Everyone looked at me after that one. I accepted the hit. When my turn came, I said I would protect the possibility that Seongram could survive without needing me at the center. My voice nearly broke because part of me still wanted to be necessary. Necessary feels safer than loved, safer than respected, safer than replaceable. But necessary also becomes a cage for everyone else. I signed the transition draft with that fear still alive in me. Only then did the Founder system unlock the final ownership chamber. Not when enemies were arrested. Not when money was secured. Not when bullies begged. It waited until I signed away the story where I alone saved everyone. The message appeared on my phone in silver light. Guardian has accepted replacement. Final chamber open. I did not move immediately. The silver message waited while every representative washed my face, and for once, I did not feel ashamed of being afraid. I asked the council observers to come with me, not as witnesses to my greatness, but as protection against my weakness. Nobody laughed. Mrs. O picked up her notebook like she expected the Founder himself to make accounting mistakes. The system unlocked the final ownership chamber beneath the archive. Director Jang said no owner had reached this stage since Founder Yoon. The chamber contained no treasure, only a wooden desk, an old projector, and a letter addressed to the student who was expelled without truth. Founder Yoon's recorded voice filled the room, thin and ancient, warning that ownership born from injustice could become revenge unless surrendered to service. He explained that Seongram had been founded after he himself was denied education for poverty. As wealth grew, he watched donors turn his school into a mirror of the society he wanted to challenge. The ownership system was his final correction. If the college ever expelled an innocent poor student to protect elites, control would transfer to that student. Not as compensation, as a question. What will you build after being broken? Then the system gave me its final offer. Retain permanent absolute ownership and command authority. Transfer ownership into a shared educational trust with student, staff, faculty, and public seats while serving as temporary guardian. Sell controlling rights for personal fortune and exit. The first option glowed gold. The second silver. The third green. My entire life stood inside three colors. I thought of walking out as permanent owner. No one would dare call me thief again. Teo would beg. Dean Beck would rot. Kong Mujin would fall. And every balcony that laughed would bend. I could protect Mother, Heron, Mrs. O, Jiho, Yaren, everyone. Absolute ownership looked like safety because no one could overrule me. That was exactly why it was dangerous. The sale option tempted another part of me. I could leave Seongram behind, buy Mother a building for her restaurant, send Heron anywhere, and never attend another council meeting where everyone demanded impossible things. After years of running broke, wanting rest did not make me evil. But selling would turn my pain into a payout while the college searched for its next master. I chose the shared educational trust. Not because I was pure, because I was not. I had felt revenge inside me too clearly to trust myself forever. The system asked for verbal confirmation. My voice shook when I said ownership must become responsibility that survives me. The gold option vanished. The green option vanished. The silver expanded until the whole chamber seemed to breathe. Final founder mandate accepted. Absolute ownership declined. Guardian term established until trust transition completes. Stewardship authority confirmed. Around the chamber, old lights flickered on. Director Jang bowed, but I asked her not to. I was tired of bowing, moving from fear to power without becoming respect. She smiled slightly and said that request itself would be difficult to enforce in Korea. For the first time that week, I laughed. When we announced the trust transition, reactions split exactly as expected. Some rich families said I was weakening Seongram. Some poor students feared reforms would fade without me holding total power. Staff worried councils would become symbolic. Faculty worried politics would swallow academics. Everyone had a fear. The difference was that now fears had a table where they could be argued instead of buried. Yaren became one of the architects of the new trust, not because she was rich, but because she understood both the poison and the paperwork of elite families. Jiho joined as external integrity advisor. Mrs. O accepted a staff council seat after insisting she was too old, then immediately became the scariest person in meetings. Heron said she wanted a seat too because snack policy affected student morale. Mother told her to finish middle school first. Teo's disciplinary hearing came after his father's indictment. The campus wanted blood. I understood. He had framed me, mocked me, and nearly destroyed Mrs. O. He entered the hearing without his family lawyer, looking like a prince who had been removed from the painting. He bowed to me first. I told him not to perform for me. He turned and bowed to Mrs. O instead. His apology was not beautiful. It was messy, incomplete, and full of shame he barely knew how to hold. He admitted what he had done, named every student he pressured, and accepted expulsion if the panel decided it. Mrs. O listened with folded hands. When he finished, she said apology was not a broom that swept broken glass away. He would have to pick up each piece. The panel decided Teo would be suspended for 1 year, lose all leadership privileges, testify fully in criminal proceedings, complete unpaid service under staff supervision, and contribute his personal trust allowance to the restitution fund. Expulsion remained possible if he hid anything. Some students called it too merciful. Others called it too harsh. Teo accepted without argument. That mattered, but it did not erase the past. He asked me privately whether I forgave him. I said no. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way he wanted. But I would not spend my life feeding on hatred for him. That was all I could give honestly. He nodded like the answer hurt, then said it was more than his father had ever taught him to expect. Kong Mujin's downfall was slower. Men like him do not collapse dramatically unless the ground underneath has already been dug out. The founder archive, Teo's drive, financial audits, staff testimony, and donor contract trails formed a case too large for polite denial. His companies lost public contracts. His board removed him temporarily. He called me once from a private number and said I had ruined generations of work. I told him generations of work built on stolen futures deserved ruin. He laughed, and said I would understand one day that institutions were not saved by kindness. I said perhaps not, but they were definitely destroyed by men who thought kindness was weakness. He hung up. I never heard his voice again except in trial recordings. Seongram did not heal quickly after that. No real place does. Some faculty left. Some donors vanished. Some students transferred because they missed the old order or feared the new uncertainty. The newspapers lost interest once arrests stopped looking dramatic. What remained was harder than scandal. Building schedules, reviewing budgets, replacing systems, answering complaints, and proving reform after applause had left. I returned to class during the transition term. The first lecture after everything was unbearable. Students kept glancing at me instead of the professor. I was technically guardian owner of the college, sitting in the third row trying to understand corporate finance. The professor asked if I wanted special accommodation. I said anonymous grading would be enough. If I preached fairness and accepted privilege, Seongram would learn hypocrisy in my handwriting. Some students still hated me. They said I had turned the college into a guilt museum. Others treated me like a hero, which was nearly as uncomfortable. A first year once asked if I could make her parking fine disappear. I asked if she had parked illegally. She said yes, but for a good reason. I told her congratulations. She had discovered consequences. Haran said I was becoming boring. I said boring was underrated. Yaron and I grew closer in the spaces between crises. Not with dramatic confessions, but with arguments over policy drafts and late-night convenience store meals after council meetings. She saw the ugliest parts of my anger and did not flatter them. I saw the loneliness under her perfection and did not use it against her. We were not a romance poster. We were two exhausted students trying to make power less poisonous. One night, after Jiho publicly reconciled with her during a review hearing, Yaron cried in the stairwell where no cameras could see. She said she had spent years becoming useful because she could not become brave. I told her bravery sometimes arrives late and still has work to do. She laughed through tears and called that an annoyingly owner-like thing to say. I told her my title was temporary. She said good. Mother's food stall moved into a proper shop, but she refused the luxury location offered by alumni trying to gain favor. She chose a small corner near the station and paid rent through a normal loan that I secretly hated and respected. She said if I solved every problem with ownership, our family would forget how to stand. I told her standing was easier with chairs. She threw a towel at me. Haran adapted fastest. She visited campus often, terrorized council members with snack demands, and told reporters I was less impressive at home because I still forgot laundry. She became my reminder that public stories flatten people. To the world, I was the poor student who bought a college. To Haran, I was the brother who once burned ramen while trying to help with homework. Mrs. O's grandson recovered after the staff medical fund covered his treatment delays. She brought him to campus during a trust transition ceremony. He bowed to me, and I panicked because I did not want a child thanking me like a king. Mrs. O noticed and told him to thank the staff council instead. Then she winked at me. She understood shared power better than any trustee. The final legal transfer into the educational trust happened 6 months after my expulsion. We held it in the central hall, the same place where they had tried to erase me. This time, no balconies were reserved for rich students. Staff, faculty, scholarship families, alumni victims, and current students filled the floor together. The founder seal rested on a plain wooden stand, no longer hidden, no longer worshipped. Director Jang read the trust terms aloud. No donor could influence discipline. No student could be expelled without evidence review and appeal council. Staff councils had budget oversight. Scholarship funds required public reporting. The guardian owner seat would dissolve after my graduation unless renewed by council vote. Seongram would never again belong fully to one family, one board, or one frightened boy with revenge in his hands. When I signed, the system appeared one last time. The silver emblem pulsed gently. Final transfer confirmed. Ownership returned to purpose. Candidate released. For a moment, I felt strangely empty. The system that had made me owner, warned me, tempted me, and guided me had finished its work. Without it, I was just Lee Hyunwoo again. Poor student. Son. Brother. Temporary guardian. Human. Then the hall began clapping. Not the cruel sound from my expulsion. Not the terrified applause of people obeying power. This was uneven, emotional, awkward, and real. Mrs. O clapped with both hands high. Jiho clapped beside Yeren. Haran whistled badly. Mother cried without hiding. I looked at the dome above me and remembered how small I had felt under it. The building had not changed size. I had changed what it meant. After the ceremony, Teo approached in a simple staff vest, still serving his suspension hours. He did not ask for forgiveness this time. He told me Kong Mujin's trial would begin next month, and he would testify. Then he said he had apologized to Mrs. O again, and she had given him a list of storage rooms to reorganize. His expression was tragic. I laughed before I could stop myself. That laughter surprised both of us. It did not erase anything. It did not make us friends. But it proved the past no longer controlled every breath between us. Teo said he deserved the storage rooms. I said he probably deserved worse, but Mrs. O had better imagination than me. He smiled faintly and went back to work. Yeren found me outside the hall after everyone left. She asked if I regretted giving up absolute ownership. I looked at the campus paths, the repaired staff entrance, the student posters, the audit office lights still on. I thought about how easy it would have been to rule from the top and call it protection. Then I thought about how quickly protection becomes control when nobody can challenge it. I told her I regretted nothing, but I was scared all the time. She said that was probably a sign I should remain close to the councils. I asked if that was her way of saying she would keep bothering me. She said someone had to, because temporary guardians with tragic backstories were statistically likely to become dramatic. I accused her of inventing statistics. She did not deny it. We walked past the Heritage Gallery, where the Founder Vault had become a public archive. Students could now read the documents that once terrified donors. A plaque near the entrance did not mention me as savior. I insisted on that. It read, "Institutions fail when truth becomes too expensive." That was enough. Names fade. Warnings should stay. At home that night, Mother placed a small bowl of rice in front of me and asked if the owner of a college still needed dinner. I said the owner had resigned and the student was starving. She smiled and pushed extra kimchi toward me. Haran asked whether she could tell classmates I used to own a college. I said technically temporary guardian. She said that sounded boring and decided to lie responsibly. The next morning, I entered campus through the main gate without security stopping or bowing too deeply. A first-year scholarship student stood nearby, arguing with an administrator about missing housing documents. The administrator looked annoyed, then noticed me and straightened. I almost intervened. Then the student opened the new appeal app and said she knew her rights. I kept walking. That was the moment I understood the ending. Not when Teo begged. Not when Dean Beck was arrested. Not when the founder system called me owner. It was watching someone else face a smaller injustice without needing a miracle to survive it. Seongram was not fixed forever, but it had learned to leave tools where frightened students could reach them. Months later, Kong Mujin was convicted of fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy connected to the founder archive theft. Dean Beck lost his license to work in education administration. Professor Kwan accepted a plea and testified against donors. Board Chairman Han resigned quietly after the trust review found hidden conflicts. Consequences arrived slowly, with fewer dramatic expressions than Manhwa villains deserved, but they arrived. Jiho returned to graduate through a special restorative program, not as charity, but as correction. At his ceremony, Yeren sat beside him openly, and their families' reserved seats behind them remained empty. He said that felt sad and peaceful at the same time. I understood. Healing often means losing the fantasy that the people who hurt you will arrive exactly as you need them. Yeren's family eventually issued a formal apology for silencing Jiho. He accepted the document for legal record, not emotional closure. Yeren asked if that made her cruel. He said no. It made her a person who had learned documents cannot hug. They both laughed, and I pretended not to notice because siblings deserve privacy even in public halls. The staff council became the most feared institution on campus, mostly because Mrs. O read every budget line like a detective. Donor families who once demanded private rooms now submitted forms through the same portal as everyone else. Some hated it. Some adapted. A few actually became useful. Reform did not require everyone to become good. Sometimes making selfishness pass through transparent rules was enough. Teo completed his year away from classes while working through restitution. When he applied for readmission, the council debated for 4 hours. In the end, they allowed him back under strict conditions. I did not vote. It was no longer my decision alone. Watching others decide the fate of the boy who framed me was harder than I expected and healthier than I wanted to admit. He returned quietly. No entourage, no imported shoes displayed like weapons, no lazy waif. Some students never spoke to him. Some staff gave him tasks nobody else wanted. He accepted them. One afternoon, I saw him carrying boxes beside a scholarship student he once mocked. They were not friends, but they were working in the same direction, and sometimes that is where change begins. I kept the original expulsion document in my desk, not because I enjoyed remembering, but because power forgets quickly when surrounded by comfort. The line where I wrote that I rejected the false accusation remained visible. On days when meetings became exhausting and compromise tasted like defeat, I read that sentence again. It reminded me that my first act as owner was not command. It was refusal. The founder system never returned after the trust transfer, except once. Near the end of the year, my phone lit up while I was helping Heron with math at Mother's shop. The silver emblem appeared for 3 seconds. No task, no reward, just one message. Ownership fulfilled when no one needs to beg the owner for justice. Then it vanished, leaving my cracked screen ordinary again. I showed Mother. She read it twice and said the founder had finally learned to speak like a decent elder. Heron asked if the system could help with algebra. It did not respond. She declared it useless. I laughed so hard customers turned to look. For once, the magic had nothing left to demand from me. Seongrim's first new scholarship class under the trust arrived the next spring. They looked nervous, proud, suspicious, and hopeful in equal measure. I watched them cross the plaza without lowering their voices. Some were rich. Some were not. Some would become kind. Some would probably become problems. The point was not to create saints. The point was to create a college where power could be questioned before it became violence. During orientation, I was asked to speak. I stood in the central hall where my life had been publicly broken and publicly rewritten. I told them Seongrim had once confused wealth with worth, obedience with honor, and silence with stability. I told them I had once been falsely accused, expelled, and then given more power than my anger deserved. The room went still. Then I told them the dangerous part was not being poor or becoming powerful. The dangerous part was believing pain automatically made me righteous. It did not. Pain explained my anger, but it did not govern it. Every reform worth keeping came from people who stopped me from turning justice into revenge. Mrs. O nodded firmly from the staff section, as if grading me. After the speech, a student approached me with a worn bag and asked if rich students would still look down on him. I wanted to say no. That would have been a beautiful lie. Instead, I said some might. But now the college had rules, people, and records that did not belong to their fathers. He smiled nervously and said that sounded better than hope. I told him sometimes structure is hope with paperwork. I walked away from the hall without music, without a dramatic final bow, without anyone begging at my feet. That was better. The bullies had begged when their power cracked, but the ending was never supposed to be their humiliation. The ending was a campus where the next poor student did not need to become owner of everything just to be believed. Still, I would be lying if I said I never remembered the day Teo's smile disappeared. A small part of me will always treasure it. I am human, not a temple. But the larger part remembers Mrs. O keeping her job, Jiho returning, Yeren breathing freely, Mother serving dinner without fear, Heron joking about algebra, and students learning the difference between mercy and weakness. People online still call me the poor student who bought an entire college after being expelled. It is a catchy title, so I understand why it stayed. But the truth is stranger. I did not buy Seongrim to become rich. The system bought Seongrim with the accumulated shame of everyone it had failed, then placed the deed in the hands of the student they thought easiest to erase. And I learned that owning a college is not the same as owning justice. Justice cannot be owned. It has to be built, argued over, protected, revised, and handed to people who may not always thank you. The moment it depends on one wounded boy's mood, it becomes another throne. So I gave the throne legs, made it a table, and invited the people who used to stand outside the room. If there is a final lesson, it is not that poor students should wait for magical systems, or that bullies always kneel beautifully in the end. Real life is messier than that, and so was mine. The lesson is that false accusations survive where power never has to explain itself. Break that silence, and even the strongest marble hall starts to crack. As for me, I am still Lee Hyunwoo. I still study too late, still forget meals, still argue with Yeren over policy language, still get scolded by mother, still lose to Heron's sarcasm, and still feel my stomach tighten when someone calls me thief in old recordings. But now, when I walk through Seongram's gate, I do not feel like a stain on their perfect campus. I feel like proof that perfection was always the lie. The founder's seal sits in the public archive now, sealed behind glass not as a treasure, but as a warning. Students pass it every day. Some barely notice. Some stop and read. The plaque beneath it says a school belongs first to the truth it is willing to protect. Whenever I see those words, I remember the phone vibrating in my pocket while everyone waited for me to break. I did break, in some places. I lost trust easily after that. I doubted apologies. I feared my own anger. I learned that forgiveness without repair was decoration, and punishment without purpose was hunger wearing a judge's mask. But broken places can become doors if people keep walking through them with tools instead of trophies. So no, I did not forgive everyone because they begged. Some apologies stayed outside my heart. Some consequences continued after tears dried. Some families never admitted what they did. But Seongram no longer needed my forgiveness to function. It needed records, counsels, courage, and ordinary people willing to interrupt beautiful lies. That is what we built. On the anniversary of my expulsion, I returned to the central hall before sunrise. No crowd, no cameras, no dean, no Teo, no system. Just the empty dome and the faint hum of cleaning machines. Mrs. O spotted me and handed me a mop without ceremony. She said if I planned to stand there dramatically, I could at least be useful. I took the mop and laughed. The former owner of Seongram Royal College cleaned the same floor where he had once been called a thief. It did not feel humiliating. It felt complete. Ownership had ended. Responsibility remained. And when the first students entered that morning, walking across a hall polished by hands no donor used to see, I finally understood what the founder's reward had really been. It was not the college. It was the chance to choose what kind of man I would become after the world gave me every excuse to become cruel. I chose imperfectly, angrily, with help, with mistakes, with people correcting me whenever pride returned. But I chose. And because I chose, Seongram Royal College no longer belonged to those who looked down from the balconies. It belonged to everyone who refused to let truth be expelled again.